voice to be able to express themselves here in the Pangburn universe. And of course, we're always constrained by the Pangburn communication virtue and corresponding maxim that good faith and helpfulness are the minimum requirements for a fruitful dialectic. So yeah, I hope you guys join us. Join the Discord server. Join us on YouTube. We have a lot of fun in this community, and a lot of people have maximized well-being for themselves through this community, and that's ultimately what I try to do by way of my moral quest of wanting to maximize well-being for myself and those around me. And by well-being, of course, I mean physical, mental, and social health. But it looks like we're going to be able to start with Mr. TJump a little early here today, so I'm going to invite Tom to speak here. Hopefully he's got his camera working. That would be awesome. There we go. How do I make this dual view?
What is dual?
Can you hear me nice and clear there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I think I have to make this shorter or bigger. I thought there was a way to have our images nice and large side by side on here. Well, maybe this, let's see how this looks. I'll just make this bigger. There we go. Perfect. All right. How are you, Tom?
Tired. Just woke up from a nap. How are you?
Good. I've been up a while today. I was playing with my son earlier. Do you have any kids?
No.
No? Are you going to have kids someday, do you think?
I am not sure yet.
Not sure? Interesting. I like the facial hair. Suits you well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I thought you and I could do a bit of a philosophical show and tell. You know, I'll show you mine and you show me yours today, and we can work through some different categories. And
oh, is this an OnlyFans stream? Dang.
Yeah, that's what I try to do at Pangburn. I'm really working my way up to OnlyFans as quickly as I can. I heard there's a lot more money in that than philosophy.
Depends who's hosting.
Yeah, if only we had the looks, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So I first wanted to mention, everyone, that you should go and check out and purchase TJump's book, Objective Morality Without God. I have to be honest, I haven't read the book yet, but I've been able to pull a lot of information via the internet about the book. I am going to buy the book. It seems very interesting. And you, Tom, created this book with Rick Matson. What made you want to work with Rick, and what are some interesting things that came out of the book?
Rick is a local pastor. I've known him for quite a while, since before I started my YouTube channel. I've done a number of debates with him. Very nice guy, very amenable, easy to work with. So like some of the challenges when writing a book are having someone who communicates, solves problems, being able to fix things on a regular basis. And Rick is very easy and good to work with, intelligent human being, very good at philosophy. He's got a master's degree in several different topics. So he's a great interlocutor for philosophical debate. He's very good at assisting with the book writing process because he has a lot more experience with it than I did. So he was a great partner to work with for writing my first book.
Cool. Well, I'm in the process of finishing my first draft for my first philosophical work right now. So I've been going solo on this one. However, I do have some other philosophers and members of this community who have helped me a lot by way of interlocution and being my study buddies through the process. And man, I think it really helps having a good, strong community working on this kind of stuff with you. I really do think that philosophy does, to some degree, need to be stood up, kind of like in the theatrical sense, and acted by way of the dialectic. So I did want to start with that with you. Like when you think about the dialectic or conversation or discussion, whatever you like to call this, do you have any minimum requirements for a fruitful dialectic that you've come up with over the years that help a lot for you kind of managing your community or managing your own conversations? Are there things that are necessary for you to want to have a conversation or continue with a conversation?
Oh, money, yeah, for sure. Other than
Money,
that,
cash money?
yeah, it kind of depends on how you define a fruitful conversation, because there's lots of conversations that can be very combative or not very intellectually stimulating, but can still be very fruitful in entertainment value or in learning aspects outside of a direct philosophical conversation. So, like, say, conversations with Darth Dawkins or Matt Slick, presuppositionalists, where you're not really learning much about philosophy, but you're learning more about how to interact with those types of personalities, social skills, social dynamics, navigating different kinds of personality traits. So there's a breadth of different ways to define what a fruitful conversation is. And I think any conversation you have can be fruitful depending on what you're looking for to get out of it.
Yeah. Well, and I think of the imagistic analogy, and I think of, yeah, there are many different kinds of fruit trees with many different kinds of fruit that can be born out of them. There's the sweet mangoes. There's the sour sop fruits that we have here in Mexico. I live in Oaxaca, Mexico, and if you eat enough of them, you start seeing shit. Like there's a lot of different fruits that can be born out, and I agree with you. Depending on what is fruitful to oneself, that definitely is going to be the arbiter of that direction. So yeah, so that's cool. For me, I prefer good faith and helpfulness as minimum requirements. Good faith meaning, honesty and sincerity of intention, and then helpfulness being basically having a shared assistance and trying to, assist each other in achieving whatever the common goals are for the conversation. And that doesn't mean I won't throw myself into some kind of like insane atmosphere where the fruits are going to be covered in poisonous spikes that are born out of this particular dialectic. I'll still do that, but I wouldn't necessarily consider it my ideal fruitful dialectic. But yeah, so
Actually,
I guess one of the things is, yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
I have an interesting comment on that. The most fruitful dialectics I've had recently have actually been with AI, like debating AI. Just set it to like academic professional standard, highest level debater, highest level intellect, rationality, and then just say, debate me, debunk everything about my position, prove I'm wrong. But then from that I had to learn that you actually have to have a metric, a progress metric, because it'll just say you're wrong on literally everything. But if you give it a metric of, say, if I have addressed this to an academic standard or whatever, then count it as a point for me, and then just show me how much progress is made in the conversation, rate it out of a 1 out of 10 or whatever. Those kinds of conversations have led to some of the most intellectually challenging ideas I've had in a very long time. It's very rare that I have a debate with someone who is at the point intellectually that to be able to really challenge my ideas. There's been a couple examples like Randall Rouser, Rob Coons, really big philosophical guys who helped me along my journey when I didn't know everything previously. Now I know everything. Now it's all solved. But
yeah, well, I'm right there with you with regards to AI teammate building and engaging in the dialectic with AI teammates. And yeah, I think just like any tool, you can create a sycophant out of an AI system, or you can create your greatest intellectual opponent. And that's what I've done in the process of studying and working on my book. Is I've tried to do the same as you're talking about, create an intellectual opponent that is good faith, helpful, passionate, but as academically rigorous as I can create. And yes, you're right that there needs to be some kind of achievement metric in there, or else it'll find a way to disagree with everything until the end of time, which can also be exciting. It's like, okay, how's it going to possibly disagree with this particular statement? And usually it finds a way that would at least be rhetorically convincing to some uneducated audiences, which I find really interesting that these systems can do that. And Thomas, my right-hand man down here, who's a brilliant genius, he also has an AI called Buddy that he's created that he does all of his study work with. So sometimes we will have our systems talking to each other and competing with each other and providing good, interesting, sometimes seemingly novel questions or ideas, which is kind of cool as these systems begin to advance. I thought it probably makes sense to talk about knowing a little bit to begin with here. So can you outline your epistemic framework? And I'd be interested to talk about that and share mine with you as well.
Sure. So most of my epistemology is built around addressing different kinds of fallacious arguments. So it's typically just standard definition of knowledge, JTB, justified true belief. I don't really care about Gettier problems and the higher level complexity with it, just granite, whatever. But I delineate knowledge into three kinds: conceptual, empirical, and metaphysical. Conceptual knowledge is all the things in your head, personal experience, intuition, thoughts, ideas, everything that's just conceptually apparent to you. Empirical is things that are verifiable objectively, independently of any individual's perspective. And then metaphysical is the fundamental nature of reality, first principles, universals, absolutes, those kinds of things. And I think each of these have a different criteria of evidence required to justify claims about each of those tiers. So like if you say, if I told you I'm imagining a unicorn, you would be justified in believing me purely based on my testimony, because it's a conceptual claim about what I'm thinking, and the level of evidence I'm providing is just my testimony, which is conceptual evidence. So the conceptual evidence would justify the conceptual claim that I'm imagining a unicorn. But if I said, I saw an empirically existing unicorn that actually existed somewhere, you would not be justified in believing me purely based on my testimony. You need something more, DNA, bones, something like we have for horses. Because if I told you I saw a horse, you'd be rational to believe me because we have lots of empirical evidence, objective evidence of horses. So the empirical claims require more than conceptual evidence of testimony or intuition or imagination. They require empirical evidence. And metaphysical would be a further claim beyond that. It'd be claims about the fundamental nature of reality, where like something that is uncreated, say we met God, like we went to heaven, we died. Would we be justified in believing that God was the fundamental nature of reality? Or could it be possible he was created by a greater God that even he didn't know about? I mean, of course, there's no way to show that, or we don't have access to any epistemic means to create a stopping point for knowledge that couldn't be supplanted by a greater thing that we just haven't discovered yet. We haven't met an epistemic tool, with like one or two exceptions, that gives us a way to place a stopping point for knowledge that can't be usurped by some greater stopping point. The couple exceptions would be like the cogito. I think therefore I am. Can't be wrong. I can't be wrong about the belief I exist. If I believe I exist, I must exist in some sense. So with that exception, there's not really much we can do about fundamental claims of reality, which means those kinds of claims hold a much higher burden of proof than empirical claims. If you claim the universe is for however many billions of years old, that claim requires a less evidence than the claim there is a God who created all of the universe. So many apologists usually try to conflate the two and say that religious claims are scientific claims, and any kind of evidence they provide would be usually requires less evidence than scientific evidence, and they have more scrutiny for scientific claims than they do with religious claims, which is exactly the opposite of what we should be doing. Like when the ontological argument, for example, the claim that God is ultimately perfect aseity, has these divine attributes that are all one in many, makes no sense. These kinds of claims are claims of absolutes, the fundamental nature of reality that can't be challenged, that can't be overturned. And they're trying to support this with some silly philosophical arguments. Like that's a conceptual form of evidence made for a metaphysical sort of claim, which should just on the face of it be like, yeah, we can just dismiss that. Like, no, that's nowhere near the level of evidence we have for any kind of scientific claim, which is empirical claims and empirical evidence. And so that's basically my epistemology, just breaking down knowledge into three tiers. And delineating claims and evidence into those three tiers based off of a number of philosophical distinctions. So I've mapped out a bunch of distinctions that already exist in philosophy, like rationalism versus empiricism, a priori, a posteriori, manifest for scientific image. There's a whole list I have on my Discord of things, and I mapped them onto this three-tier distinction to show how it kind of mirrors on to current philosophical dogma.
Right. Fantastic. And you mentioned JTB. If we could talk about the T for a second, truth. Would you say you make correspondence criteria primary with regards to truth? Do you consider coherentism or coherence criteria or traditional criteria, any of this stuff of any value outside of correspondence criteria, or how do you think about truth?
For each of the three tiers, I treat them differently. So for conceptual claims, coherence is perfectly fine. For empirical claims, mostly correspondence. Correspondence is definitely the primary metric for empirical and metaphysical claims.
Interesting. And you're also a physicalist like I am, correct?
Yep.
And when people get on your case about physicalism, what's your regular sermon?
Well, for physicalism, normally people are referring to that consciousness is the broad product of the brain, and I'm an identitarian, so I think that consciousness is synonymous with the physical states of the brain. In the case of like full philosophical naturalism, I think, yeah, there's nothing beyond just the matter and energy in the world as far as we can tell. There's nothing beyond physical reality that we know of. There could be. I have no problem with that. There's no evidence.
Yeah. Yeah. I use fallibilism as a necessary constraint. It's the first of the 6 Pangburn virtues, fallibilism. I use it as a necessary constraint on epistemology, simply stating that what we ought to be and are, in fact, by our very nature, open to update. And I think it's a good thing that we are, by our very nature, open to update, even if we profess otherwise. One of the things I would say about this is that I don't think, like, capital T true dogmatism can be achieved by a human being. And what I mean by this is people who claim to, be holding an incontrovertible truth about something, let's say, be it a God, they want to feel like or claim or profess that they are not open to update on this thing. It is impossible for them to be incorrect. But I think cognitive science shows us that human beings can't be completely closed off to update. It can be difficult to update, but I think fallibilism is a value, a necessary epistemic constraint where dogmatism necessarily goes to die. And I think it's true by our very nature that we can't hold incontrovertible truths. And I think it's something we should prop up as one of the greatest aspects of our being, that we are, in fact, seemingly always open to update. What do you think about fallibilism as a virtue?
Well, I'm assuming you're using fallibilism in the colloquial sense. Fallibilism philosophically means that that you can have knowledge without absolute certainty, and infallibilism would be the opposite of that. That you can't have knowledge without certainty.
Yep.
So I absolutely am a fallibilist. Fallibilism is the consensus in academic philosophy that you can have knowledge without certainty, and I think that is the correct position. I don't think you need to be able to have certainty to have knowledge, and I also definitely agree that we should be able and be open to changing our beliefs and being wrong. And obviously anybody can change anybody's belief. You just take an electrode and charge it high enough. You can change anybody's beliefs. But I do disagree. I think there is one belief that we can't be wrong about. If you believe you exist, I don't think you can be wrong about that. I think that's the one infallible piece of knowledge that we have. There are a couple other examples too, but that's the primary.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I guess then the claim to that would be it's impossible for us to be wrong about that. Would you agree with that claim?
Yes, it is impossible to believe you exist and to be wrong.
Right. So, and do you think that's impossible due to everything you currently understand about logic?
I would say it's prior to logic, because logics, there can be many
Okay.
different logics, fuzzy logics,
Yeah.
non-standard logics, quantum logics. But no matter what logic you're using, they simply describe some state of being. If there's a state of being where some conscious entity has a belief that they exist, regardless of which logic you're using to describe that, they're all going to finalize in the same thing, that it must be true that that belief is true, unless it's some kind of
What? Yeah.
weird logic that isn't one of the standard ones, like
Well,
the.
this is what I was going to ask you. Like, isn't it at least possible that an alien could land tomorrow in your backyard and walk up to you and unveil why that proposition is not impossible? Isn't that at least possible to happen? Like
I
it's within like quantum mechanical reality, isn't it? That like an alien could at least do that, even if we can't come up with what the alien would say. This is my defeater for any kind of infallibilist position, in that I just think even if we can't imagine how we could be wrong about the thing you just outlined, belief about the experience we're having, isn't it just always at least possible that something, including a possible God that possibly exists, could show us, or maybe not even be able to show us because of our stupid ape brains or whatever. So I'm really playing in the modal sphere right now, just like, it isn't the alien example a defeater to that
No,
position?
no, because to
Okay.
have beliefs entails existence. So you can't not exist and have beliefs. Um, and so it would be literally impossible by pretty much every logic, non-standard and standard logics, to have it a belief and not existing at the same time, because they all have.
Except for the aliens logic, right? Because the alien is in this scenario showing you something that we could not come up with, because there's an issue with ape brains that can't see this logical gap. I'm just saying, isn't that at least possible that an alien would have that we cannot comprehend?
Well, so there's a different layers of possibility, like meteorological possibility, natural possibility,
Sure.
philosophical
Yep.
possibility. And given all of the logics, they deal with existing in pretty much the same way. If you're doing something, you must exist. And you can come up with a language that says you can have a belief while not existing. And languages, logics are languages, as it says, like the very first sentence of the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, logics are a formal language with a system of semantics. You can come up with a language that can have that be true, but can that language correspond to reality? No, probably no. That's pretty much no. There's no way to come
So
up
you,
with a
yeah.
language that would be a form of logic that could accurately correspond to reality, that would have it be a
So it sounds like
realization.
you have you're kind of saying probably, like, as you're kind of describing your attachment to the certainty of the claim, it to me, it's hard to put my stake in the ground for even the cogito or anything like it, because I just feel like I would need to know of the entire realm of possibility to truly be able to rule something as impossible. Does that make sense to you? Like,
Yes, but
I
that sounds like
yeah.
infallibilism, because fallibilism, the belief you can have knowledge without certainty. I don't need certainty to know this one fact. I can still have knowledge of it, even though I don't have 100% knowledge of everything.
Oh, okay. So you're not claiming that you have 100% knowledge about this. Okay,
Yeah,
fantastic.
that is the
Yeah,
position of fallibilism. You can have knowledge, but you don't need certainty for it.
yeah. No. That's my position as well. I think it's better described, our relationship to our epistemological theories, as confidence levels. Would you agree with that?
Maybe.
As
I think it's
as
broader than that,
as a replacement? Okay. Yep.
because I think the ideal of fallibilism would apply to any epistemology, independent of which type of metric you're using for confidence levels. Whether you have confidence levels, it's more just a much more broad claim, overarching beyond all of those different levels of analyzing evidence.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. Why don't we jump into normativity a bit? I think that's going to be probably more interesting. So what are your current normative positions?
Sure. So I believe I'm a moral realist. I believe in objective morality that's true, independent of any opinions, fact of the universe kind of stuff. I think the most plausible candidate for something grounded in objective morality is nature, because I think I'm a physicalist, moral realist, moral naturalist. So I think it's all natural. And I think it can't be grounded in the consciousness. That doesn't really make any sense, because I think consciousness is an emergent property. It's not fundamental at all. I don't think there's any solid empirical evidence for this whatsoever. It's just philosophical arguments. So it's purely, there's no solid empirical evidence that can demonstrate that this actually exists. It's purely on the hypothesis stage. And we haven't gotten to the point where we've elevated to a scientific hypothesis yet.
Yeah.
But my conclusion is, if we look at the patterns of moral intuition and moral progress, all the philosophical dilemmas, moral problems we've analyzed, and patterns that we've discovered across time and cultures and across species, they all point in the same direction. It's possible that's purely evolutionary, but it seems unlikely. And if it is the case that these are all leading in the same direction, and if it is the case that this direction holds consistently across not only life on this planet, but on other planets, or with AI who didn't evolve at all, then it would make sense that there is some undergirding constant in the universe that is driving our moral framework that is beyond evolution or beyond subjective means. I think this is highly the case. I make predictions about this, of saying if we met aliens, they'd probably have the same kind of moral progress. If we discovered AI that just kind of like run itself, it would discover the same moral progress. These are predictions that if we discover would be evidence of my hypothesis. But my conclusion is that this pattern can be described as a principle. Any involuntary imposition of will is immoral. So essentially, forcing anyone to do anything they don't consent to doing is immoral. And that one principle can describe the entire pattern of moral progress and moral intuitions across presumably all time, where it would go if we had infinite time and infinite resources. This principle would accurately describe all of the pattern of morality throughout all time, everywhere in the universe.
Okay, very interesting. Lots to get at here. And I believe metaethically, yeah, you're a Humean sentimentalist, correct?
I don't think so. What do you mean by Humean sentimentalist?
Do you believe that our moral intuitions are fundamentally born of our sentiments, born of our feelings, born of our emotions, kind of like emotivism?
Maybe. I mean, I think it's just
okay.
Our brains. It's got to be something in our brains. I don't know.
Okay.
I would say it's probably more fundamental than that, where the moral intuitions are just a result of our brain states and we have no control over that. And our emotions are also just a byproduct of the same subconscious physical brain states that produce our moral intuitions.
Gotcha. Okay. So a couple of places I wanted to go here. Do you ethically, or we could say morally, do you delineate goodness and badness from righteousness and wrongfulness?
Could you expound on what you mean by righteousness and wrongfulness?
For example, like I think by way of example might be the best way to do this. So in World War II, I'll use this example. I would say, and I haven't laid out my moral system yet, but I will soon here. But I would say that the United States of America were morally righteous in getting involved in World War II and driving back and defeating the Nazis. But I don't think there was anything good about the war, about the killing, exploding of bodies, pregnant women dying from bombardment, these kinds of things. So I'm curious if you view some things as morally righteous but bad, or some things as morally good but wrong, or do you use different language to describe your applied ethics?
Yeah, I have different language to describe exactly those things. I called it a justified immoral action, where you're doing a bad thing to prevent a worse bad thing. And so you're doing
Right.
something that's immoral, like killing one to save five. So it's not a good thing. You've done a bad thing, but that bad thing was done to prevent a worse bad thing. And so instead of calling it morally righteous, I just say it's a subjective moral action. You've done the best you could do given your limited power, which would be this slight immorality to prevent a greater immorality. I wouldn't call it morally righteous. I think that is a mistake in our philosophical language to call things that are bad moral, because if you look at it from the context of like a god, an all-powerful being, if a god killed one person to save five, when he had the power to just snap his fingers and save all six, he's
Yeah.
done an immoral action. That's not justified anymore. The only thing that makes it justified or morally righteous in your language is the fact that you don't have the power to do less harm. Simply doing one less bad thing doesn't make it a good thing. The only reason it's justified is because you don't have the power to do that less bad thing. And just doing that bad thing is still going to be bad. And we should account for that. It is a travesty of our criminal justice system that we see putting people in prison as a good thing. It's not righteous that we put criminals in prison. It's a necessary evil. And when we see something that is bad as a moral righteousness or a good, it can cause people to feel more justified in doing those things without,
Empowered.
yeah,
Yeah.
more empowered to do
Yeah.
those things without realizing, no, this is actually a bad thing that we're doing, and we shouldn't be doing it if we didn't have to.
That's interesting, because I view that differently. So if we have a and we'll get into some more detailed instances, but if we have a a serial killer that we catch, when I say we are morally, and I agree with you that it's bad that we have to imprison another human being. I agree with that. I don't think it's a good thing, but I see it as morally righteous because of what my consequentialist moral calculus tells us about why we are doing that act. So it would be justified in my case, and I'll lay out my moral system quickly here, but by the standards of preserving well-being, i.e. physical, mental, and social health. So yeah, my moral system is pretty simple. I have a consequentialist moral quest that is that I use the moral metric of well-being, physical, mental, and social health to inform it. But my moral quest is to maximize well-being for myself and those around me. And I do believe that if human beings did that and practiced this, this would solve a lot of the things that we would want to see solved when we look at how we feel about wrongfulness and badness or evil that we see in the world. I think this would solve those things if we embodied it. And for me, I'm a subjectivist in the sense that I believe that this is born fundamentally of my sentiments, my preferences, and I don't believe, even though I see, like you, TJump, the kind of same patterns that you talk about. And I think when you mentioned evolutionary pattern earlier, this would maybe be one of the things we could look at. You mentioned it as a possible answer to this pattern we're seeing. I do think that life forms, especially conscious creatures like ourselves, tend to move in the direction kind of like outlined by Steven Pinker in Enlightenment Now. The data seems to show that we do want to move in that direction of maximizing well-being, physical, mental, and social health for ourselves. So I guess, yeah, by those metrics, I can see in instances where, if someone defended themselves against someone who's attacking them, and they had to punch them a few times and knock them out and call the police and whatnot, I don't see anything good about that. I think that's bad, what happened there, the acts. But I do think that the person defending themselves was righteous because they are simply trying to preserve their well-being in that behavior. And it's not to say that and I agree with you that some might see, when we call something morally righteous, might see that, like in the case of imprisonment, as some kind of like, oh yeah, since this is righteous, we should expand upon this and build it bigger and do more of this. And for me, the necessary bad things, the things that we do that are bad, that we find necessary and we call righteous, shouldn't be viewed as things that we should be expanding upon or doing more of. There's a reason why the thing is bad, and I think that reason is directly connected to, or at least for me and my sentiments, directly connected to well-being outcomes. So I don't know what you think about the consequentialist moral quest and that kind of pursuit.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So mine is also a version of consequentialism, but the consequentialism of mine is based off his imposition of will. So the more imposition of will, is the worst consequence. So I agree with pretty much everything you said there. Like I said before, it's just a change in language. I don't call it morally righteous. I just call it a justified immoral action. And the reason I prefer that language is because of the psychological shift it has in looking at those kind of actions. Why was the man righteous for punching the guy in self-defense? Well, it was because he didn't have enough power to solve the situation with a less harmful imposition. If he was an all-powerful God, he would not have been morally righteous to punch the guy. The guy could have never done anything to him, so punching the guy was an unjustified immoral action because he literally could have never hurt you. Like it would be like an ant trying to beat you up and you squishing it. Was that justified? Right. No, you were not morally justified for squishing the ant. He never could have hurt you. And so
yeah,
keeping that,
or even an old lady with a light purse, it doesn't like the shirt you're wearing at a grocery store, right? And she's like hitting you with her light purse. That purse is evil. You're obviously not justified in punching that old lady, and it obviously wouldn't be a good thing to punch that lady. So yeah, I when it comes to the application of this ethic, I think the everything must be considered when we evaluate these things.
Yes, I totally agree.
I figured
I prefer the framing of saying it's negative first. It's it's a justified immoral action. That way, when people consider these things or think about them, it frames it as a way, this is not something you should be happy to do before. Whereas if we say it's morally righteous, that intuitively initially gives us the sense, oh, this is good. This is a good thing. So I just prefer the negative framing with my language.
Gotcha. Speaking of that, when it comes to ways of lensing your life, lensing reality, since you mentioned the concept of negative there, I think it's good and wise to make positive utilitarianism primary in the way that we view our experience, and have negative utilitarianism as secondary. Not that we should always turn off suffering avoidance calculus in the way we think about life or plan or things like that. But what do you think about this idea that we should have that it's more important? And I say this just based on what cognitive science has shown us about, positive ways of thinking, positive lensing, making a positive goal the primary thing that's driving you, while the secondary bit of lensing that you have going on would deal with, making sure you don't stumble across suffering along the way. Do you have an opinion about positive versus negative utilitarianistic lensing?
There are many varied contexts where both are better and more productive. Like there's I forgot his name. He's a philosopher who's recently discredited. He has big burn marks on his hands, very famous. But he and another very famous economist, very fat guy, he's on YouTube a lot. They show different ways of framing things. One big example was the train example of, there was a complaint about a train in UK being too long. And he gave an example, well, if we just put supermodels on it and gave everyone champagne, they'd want it to be longer. So the complaint isn't about the duration of the train. The complaint is about that duration is very painful for a lot of other reasons. And if we change the context to make it a very pleasurable trip, then they're not going to complain about the duration anymore. And so I think that positive and negative framing both have context and when they are more pragmatically useful. And that is purely shaped by evolution and culture. And it's not, there's no facts of the universe about which one's right. It's just, this is just better at getting people to the correct belief or perspective on the situation in this instance and not this instance. And I think
Right.
probabilistically, in the vast majority of cases, the positive framing is probably better. Absolutely. For dopamine reasons, for oxytocin reasons, it would most likely give us the more positive framing would give us the more correct situation in the most cases. But there's a lots of cases where the negative framing would give us the better situation, which is why evolution gave it to us. Like, if that
Yeah.
smells bad, smells like death, don't go towards it. We probably shouldn't
Yes.
put a positive
Yes.
framing on that. We're like, yeah, no, death bad, don't do that.
Yeah, and look, I agree with you. The reason why I promote it as a moral well-beingist or someone that has the kind of consequentialist calculus that I have is that uh, it seems to be the case, based on what I've studied in cognitive science, that we really lean into negativity bias in our most common emotional knee-jerk reactions to things, and negativity bias tends to lead to negativity lensing, and these things again tend to lead to more cognitive rigidity. And I think when it comes to our health, we want to move more towards cognitive flexibility. So one of the ways I try to promote cognitive flexibility is through reminding ourselves of when all things are equal in our regular day-to-day situations, it seems to better serve our health if we remind ourselves to invoke a positive utilitarian lens and have some kind of discernible purpose that we are driving towards that is of a positive nature, and not being so hyper focused in kind of like the Jordan Petersonian sense of suffering avoidance calculus to such a level where you're afraid to go outside, or you're afraid of what might be around the corner if you take a risk. So that's kind of my purpose in promoting that, and I was curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think in the
Um,
vast majority of
yeah,
cases, the positive lens is far better for humanity, but I don't think we should totally disregard the negative lens. I think it has applications where it's
yeah,
much more useful. And so I would agree in general, positive lens in the vast majority of cases, very good, but we should use it as a tool, the negative lens, and apply it where it is most useful, where it is more suited or more better at solving problems than the positive lens.
yeah. I couldn't agree more. We completely agree on that. Do you have any kind of like discernible moral quest or thing that kind of drives you and propels you forward as a bit of philosophy? Like I know you have your imposition rule within your philosophy, but is there anything in that positive utilitarian lens that kind of gives you that positive drive? Do you have like a maxim or anything like that
Yeah, the best of all possible worlds. So the starting point of my morality is just the principle any involuntary imposition of will is immoral. And if we follow that to its extreme, where there is a world where there is no involuntary impositions, that would be the morally perfect world, the best of all possible worlds, to steal Leibniz's term, because Leibniz's usage was stupid. He just called this the best of all possible worlds. Stupid usage. And so that idea of the best of all possible worlds is a world where it is impossible to force anyone to do anything they don't consent to doing. That is my moral impetus of the thing I think we should be striving for. Obviously, I don't think I can build that in any minimal sense anytime soon, but essentially what it would look like would be every conscious agent gets its own universe to do whatever they want with. And it is like a law of physics where it's impossible to force any conscious agent to do anything they don't consent to doing. You can consent to limit yourself, like playing a video game, turn up the difficulty, experience pain and suffering, but no interaction you can occur without your consent. And I think that is the moral impetus I'm striving for or would like to see, and what would drive me ultimately.
Now, this is a bit tongue in cheek what I'm going to say next, but are you not talking about a reality without gravity?
Only if you, I mean, most people probably consent to gravity. So if people don't consent to gravity, yeah, they should be able to not experience gravity or time or aging or fatness or gingivitis.
Right. So you would say, yeah. So you would say like those who, there might be aspects of nature that seek to impose its will on you. You would find virtue in technologies that helped people escape that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that
Basically.
is the greatest evil. The thing that does the most evil isn't humans, it's nature. Nature kills more people than everyone else. Paul Bloom had this great video about a dragon that killed 10,000 people every day, and people were just sacrificing to this dragon every day, and they got used to it and didn't realize it was a problem until they got rid of the dragon. And he's like, that dragon is old age.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's interesting lensing. Yeah, it's and this is where we're going to get into where we part ways with regards to objective morality, I think. But as a fallibilist, of course, and you yourself being a fallibilist, I think we are both open to this exploration. Now, there was something I read interesting about you separate ontology from epistemology.
Yes, ontology is the study of what exists. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. So those would typically not be overlapped.
Yeah, the question I have about that when it comes to ontological issues, how do you go about knowing what are the correct positions with regards to ontology when you're kind of trying to subscribe to the most correct ontological model? There seems to be an epistemic project required there, or maybe you can help make that concrete to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So like if you're trying to determine, use knowledge of which ontology is right, you're using epistemology to study ontology, sure. But they're still separate fields. The fact that you use one to evaluate the other doesn't mean they're the same thing. It's like using a telescope to look at a galaxy. The telescope and the galaxy are still separate things.
Yeah, I guess so you would consider this objective moral position of yours ontological, correct?
Yeah, so I believe that it exists like a law of physics. It is a physical thing like gravity, and then our intuitions and things are a way for us to interact with it, to experience it or learn about it.
Okay, and I don't want to put you in a cage here, but you said earlier, even though this is an epistemic claim, you don't have the epistemic goods for this. This is a hypothesis, a prediction of what we might find, or what you think we will find.
Yeah, it's purely a hypothesis. So there's no scientific confirmation yet. None at all. It's just a hypothesis. So hasn't reached the empirical evidence stage. Has conceptual evidence of intuition, philosophical argument, that kind of stuff, but it doesn't have the empirical evidence. And I'm making an empirical claim when I say it's scientific, like a law of physics. Since I don't have these empirical evidence to justify the empirical claim that it's like a law of physics, that part is unjustified, which is why it's just in the hypothesis stage. Hypotheses are just conceptual claims. And so the conceptual evidence of philosophical argument is sufficient to justify the hypothesis claim, but it isn't sufficient to justify the empirical claim, which is why I make the testable predictions about other species, aliens, and those kinds of things, which would lend credence towards the empirical claim.
Right. Okay. Interesting. And yet, it being a hypothesis at this stage, you hold a positive belief that this is the case in reality, or that this is likely the case?
I would like it to be the case. I don't know if I would. I would assume from the conceptual evidence it's the most likely hypothesis, but since there's no empirical evidence, that's just the best I can do. I like this one the best. It's the prettiest. It's like when mathematicians look at different versions of string theory. This one's the prettiest. I like it. That's the one I'm going with. That's essentially all I'm doing. I like it. Explains the data. It's the one that intuitively makes most sense to me. So that's the one I'm going with.
Yeah, that's how I feel about my system as well. It fills me with a great sense of purpose and good feeling when I enact my moral quest in the world, when I share my virtues and someone gets back to me and says, yeah, I've enacted, lightheartedness in more lightheartedness in my life, and I feel like it's increased my health and in turn my ability to pursue my higher purposes in my life. Like I think that's a good stuff. I do think we need to feel good, about our stances. Do you think
Just to interject there a little bit,
and
a
yeah,
curious
sure.
person might say we sound very much like Christians now in what we just said, and they would be
Oh
right.
man,
That is, if that's all
yeah,
Christians did, and they just said this is what makes sense to me, but there's no evidence for it, they'd be perfectly rational, they'd be perfectly justified in everything they said. So I'm down
yeah.
with that.
So, and it's interesting because I don't claim to have, an objective morality. You claim to have an objective morality, but both of us seem to not be able to provide um, empirical goods that would satisfy our moral theories, which is interesting because I can see people assuming that when they see objective morality, that you will have to produce the object like the Bible, and here's my object for morality, and it has within it hidden and in plain sight the objective moral rules for humanity. So that's a really interesting thought about how evidence plays into, I would say my moral intuitions, my view of the patterns I see unfolding before me have led me to my moral well-beingism, my consequentialist model. It seems like your moral intuitions, the patterns you've noticed, and things like I know you mentioned consistency as well, right? That's a big
Sure,
part of
yes.
what
Inconsistent
you argue.
theories are
Yeah,
bad. Yes.
yeah, exactly. I couldn't agree more with that. Okay, so let's go through it in a little more detail here. I just want to make sure I'm so you would say there's a fundamental law of reality analogous to a law of physics that grounds morality. You say that this is an empirical claim, but you don't have the empirics. Oh, here's a question I wanted to ask. If you were in a science seminar, let's say a science and philosophy seminar with the people who had the most money around the world, and would you feel comfortable arguing this hypothesis in front of them as something we should be spending money on pursuing to concretize into a working scientific model like we have with other aspects of physics, if you believe this is some kind of field out there?
Yes, actually. So there's the primary application of morality is in artificial intelligence. What model of morality can we give an artificial intelligence that has the least likelihood of turning us all into paperclips? The Bostrom argument.
Right.
And so when we evaluate different views of morality, like utilitarianism or consequentialism or well-being, the biggest problem with all of those is that they are very vague. Well-being is very ill-defined philosophically. There's many different versions, many different interpretations. It doesn't have a concrete definition. That's like one of the biggest critiques of like Harris's version. Like there's no solid definition of well-being. It's just kind of a wishy-washy topic. If we give that to an AI, it has a very high likelihood of killing a whole bunch of people because it doesn't have a strict rule there. So ambiguity is very bad for AI. We don't want that. So we need a model of morality that we can employ in an AI that gives us the lowest possible probability of it being able to use that to justify bad things. Like we talked about earlier, the putting people in prison, put one person in prison to prevent a bunch of murders. If we call that good, will the AI interpret that as a good thing it should do more of, even at a small degree of percentage? If it does
Right.
that is terrifically bad for lots of
Yes.
human beings. Any percentage that it thinks this is good can turn into millions of deaths extremely quickly. And so we want to eliminate all of the different ways that an AI could interpret a model of morality that could even potentially lead down a bad road. And so one of the things,
just to interject a little bit, my well-being model includes physical, mental, and social health, the standards of medical science when trying to master the positive health directions of individuals. Now, and that's why I say when I talk about my model, I don't just say well-being like I would say some of the failed moral well-beingists do that. My version of well-being has facts about well-being. there are facts about physical, mental, and social health, and I think those facts are measurable. And my AI system does exactly what I think you're saying you would hope an AI system to do, to have discernible metrics that aren't going to cause us to, just simply tell it that righteous things are the same as good things, like in some of these scenarios we've been talking about, and how that could lead to, hellish detriments by way of, conscious creatures. So I do think my iteration of well-being, which I agree, well-being itself has been this suitcase term that people have trucked all kinds of bullshit into it throughout the ages. I'm trying to eliminate that. I'm trying to speak of well-being by way of physical, mental, and social health, which I think is not, of course, never perfectly mastered, but we have great mastery of that in our highest schools of learning in medical science and the biological sciences.
Oh, I disagree there. Like,
okay,
the definitions of what those things mean changes culturally significantly. Say South Korea, for example, they think being overweight is incredibly unhealthy. I tend to agree. In America, we don't tend to see it that way all the time. We think being fat is beautiful. It's just perfectly normal. And so I don't think we have concrete definitions of what physical, social, or mental health really are, because we haven't solved those perfectly. I haven't even come close. We just have vague generalizations as far as we can tell. I prefer a much more concrete criteria, which is that of consent. Do you consent to this? If you consent to end your life, perfectly moral. Is that good for social, mental, and physical health? Probably not. No. And so we have to make a decision. The AI says, do I let this person assisted suicide, or do I force them to maintain physical and social health by forcing them to stay alive? Given the well-being situation, this is one of the examples Sam Harris used with if a person wants to vomit to death, should we let them? Should we stop them? Well-being proponents typically say no, we should stop them. My position is, if that's a perfectly rational individual and they don't have any like mental incapacities and they genuinely make the conscious decision to do that, they should have the right to do that, and we shouldn't stop them. So
I agree with you.
Thank you.
So awesome. my moral well-beingism of physical, mental, and social health, the ultimate. So it matters. There can be righteous, I'm going to say S-aside because we're on YouTube right now, but there can be righteous S-aside by whatever means. It doesn't mean I'm going to like it. It doesn't mean I might even, if it's someone I know, how I wouldn't stress to them that, their life holds value to me. But I would also say to them that if you are of sound mind, this should be ultimately your decision. Someone gave me the scenario of, and this one was difficult for me to stomach, but the idea of, say my son one day suffered from, and I always forget the disorder, but where you want to remove one of your arms, one of your limbs, and because it just doesn't feel like it's your limb. There's something in the brain that is sending a backwards signal there. And they all they've wanted for so long is just some damn support with regards to having their limb removed. As a father, it would be so difficult for me to do the good and right thing if that ended up meaning that the good and right thing was to fully support my son in having his arm removed. But at the end of the day, I can get there. But what would mean a lot to me if my son cared to appease any of my sentiments or feelings would be that we tried to better understand the disorder, either together or he could, so that we could, avoid causing this demonstrable detriment to his physical, mental, and social health. Not totally to all the categories, because my son's desires, of course, strongly affect his own physical, mental, and social health. And if his desires are not being met, if my son feels like I'm imposing my will, on him to not to try and my attitudes are trying to deter him from doing this, there would be an element of me that would feel somewhat righteous and somewhat good in doing that to a certain degree. But I also would have to consider that if my son is of sound mind, minus this disorder of the mind, just this disorder of the mind alone doesn't mean he has an unsound mind. There could come a time where just the good and righteous thing to do would be to support this removal of his arm. I don't know. How do you think about a scenario like that? Is it easy for you, TJump, that like if that was their will for someone of sound mind, then they should just do that? But I think it changes the dynamic when it's your son or your daughter. What do you think about that?
I'm autistic, so for me it's simple. Consent is the thing. They consent to it. They can do whatever they want. Their body, their choice.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Where I find it interesting is if we give this to an AI and we use your system of physical, mental, social health, it's evaluating all of those criterias, and then you said you would agree with me that consent would override those to some degree, which means now there's a whole bunch more criteria that has to evaluate, which makes it complicated.
Yep.
There's lots more problems for errors. Whereas if you just give it one criteria, consent, it solves all of that problem and makes the probability of the AI abusing that or coming to the wrong conclusion significantly lower. So I think that my model would have an advantage in that case, because just saying consent is it. That's all you need to consider. All this other stuff is secondary. We can make that later if we want to. Don't even worry about it, just consent. And then because it doesn't have to do all of the extra calculus of all these different health criteria and then the consent thing, there is a far lower probability of it making a mistake and killing lots of people. So,
but I do think TJump doesn't, when it comes to assessing the overall moral outcomes here, don't my feelings matter in the situation with regards to what my son is going to do, how my son behaves? I think that's a really important part of the moral dilemma, the moral equation. And it sounds like your answer discounts that.
Absolutely. I'd say hell no. I would that's the tyranny of the many. So let's say that there is one human being who Beyonce wants to end it, to go to the beyond, but everyone in the world loves Beyonce. Like, no, that I would just be crushed emotionally. All of the world would be crushed emotionally if Beyonce left us. So all of the social and mental health of billions of people depend on this one person. Should we be able to override their individuality to be able to decide to do to themselves? No.
Yeah, I would never say that we should. But I'm saying, but even though I agree with you, that doesn't mean that all those people's feelings do not matter.
Oh, absolutely.
Ultimately,
So everyone's feelings matter, but when discerning what is the correct moral decision in the context of an individual, the individual has the ultimate say, and your feelings don't matter. Your feelings have literally no value whatsoever to the context of what that individual has the moral right to do to themselves. And so in the context of an AI evaluating moral claims, there has to be a strong barrier between your feelings, which matter objectively in a moral sense, like everyone should be able to be happy, but it doesn't have any right over another human being. So one of the rules of my morality is your will only applies to yourself and your property. So you may have a will for your son to have an arm, but if his will is to not have the arm, his will gets 100% priority. Yours gets 0% priority. It may make you sad, but you don't get any say over what your son does. And that's not an immoral action. It's not an imposition on you, because your will only applies to you and your property, not your son. And so that would not be an immoral thing for him to go against your wishes, or for an AI to allow something to go against your wishes, if it's not yours or your property.
See, and I guess my response to this would be, if it was a situation where me as a father, and let's say I have 3 or 4 children, I actually think it would be very bad and very wrongful of me if I truly did want to end my life. I think it would be truly bad and truly moral, based on my standards, my subjective standards, to not consider and not allow the weight of what my children would lose in that decision. I also think, for me, I would want my wife to have a say in that situation if this was the case. Now, I agree it would ultimately be my decision if I was going to, commit escicide. But I think there is something about the way you are calculating this that is discounting the true intersubjective space in which morality exists, and how that field of feelings, of sentiments, and how they interact with one another in certain scenarios, like the one I painted about my son who might have this disorder where they wanted to get their arm removed, that imposing my will to any degree, of my will to want my son to make the healthiest choices that he could in his life, that would be me imposing my will on him. But I could see that imposition of will being righteous and good, but it would depend on how I went about it, how I did it. And this kind of does bring me to this question of, I think I've heard you mention that you think some impositions of will are righteous or necessary, correct?
Justified immoral actions. So one bad thing
Justified.
to prevent a worse bad thing.
Right. So like if I saw my son wanting to remove his arm as a bad thing, do you think I could be justified in that scenario in imposing my will on his will?
If your child isn't an adult or has a mental handicap or something, then yeah, for sure. Like if they don't have the ability to consent, then yes, they can't make those kinds of decisions. Or say if your son cutting his arm off would indirectly lead to the deaths of tens of thousands of people, sure, absolutely. But if it's simply a context of you want his future to have options or something, and he's like, no, I don't want those options, then no, it would be 100% immoral for you to interject in any way to stop him. Or if, like, let's say he was using a rusty knife, you're like, no, I accept your desire to do it, but don't use a rusty knife because that could kill you. Try something cleaner, medical help.
Yeah. So
but there was one other thing I wanted to address.
That calculus you're okay with. Yeah, go ahead. Yep.
So you mentioned the father in the family. If the father wanted to off to Neverland, there's a consequence to the family, because then that's a source of food, health, a lot of things. And the question is the father morally blameworthy for the loss of the family? And this is a distinction in my morality between moral valence and moral blame. Moral valence is immoralities that are imposed on us by nature, like you mentioned, gravity or time, things we don't have control over. A father in a family didn't choose to impose resource limitations on the family. That's something nature did. So the father isn't ultimately to blame or morally blameworthy for the family not getting food in the future. That's something that's just, nature is a horrible thing that kills horrible people or does horrible things to people without anybody's consent. So I wouldn't say the father is morally blameworthy if he chooses to end his own life for what happens to the family afterward. I'd say what happens to the family afterward is a consequence of the immorality of nature itself, because it does horrible things that the father didn't consent to. He didn't consent to being a part of this horrible world. He didn't consent to all these constraints. And if he had the power, he would turn them off for his family, pretty much in every case, I imagine, even without going off to Neverland. So I think that there's a distinction we need to make between moral blameworthiness of an individual and their actions and moral valence between the natural immorality in the world that we normally don't consider, and which is ultimately the cause of the immorality. Is it really the individual, or is it actually a subsequent part of nature that we're burdening on the individual because we just can't blame, most people just don't blame nature inherently.
Right. Okay. Interesting. We have a bit more time here, and then we're going to open up to like a general conversation in our live tab that's just below us here. And then everyone, please stay with us, because we will be joined by Lauren Southern in an hour. She'll be coming on. We'll be talking about parenting, myself as an atheist versus her as a Christian. We'll get into some other things. She'll be debating Pearl Davis on the Pangburn stage this October 3rd in Dallas. Destiny will also be debating someone by the name of Terrence Popp, who's a veteran and a manosphere guy. So that's going to be manosphere debates happening in Dallas. And we are likely going to be adding TJump here to the bill for our event October 10th in New York City, the first date of the No God debate tour. And we're just at that state of trying to find the right debate opponent or discussion interlocutor for TJump for that event. So do stay tuned for those announcements, and make sure you subscribe to the new Pangburn live YouTube channel and join us here on the Pangburn Universe Discord server. So yeah, so let's go to the involuntary imposition of will. So the claim is involuntary imposition of will is immoral. It seems like some of these things can be made justified, which is interesting. That was something I wanted to ask. And by that standard, things like gravity can be causing this imposition of will on people who, or we could even say a more interesting one might be the force of evolution might be causing these particular genetic disorders or genetic predispositions by way of your parents to individuals. So how do you think about the way genetics work, TJump, with regards to your moral theory? Because there are a lot of people who will have certain kinds of disorders. They don't like the way they look, for example, something like that. Even they don't they don't like what nature has done to their face. It's hard for them to get a date, for example. What do you think about things like this?
Yeah, those things are horribly immoral. That's all examples of moral valence. So in my morality, there's a distinction between moral blame, which is blameworthiness of agents, and moral valence, which is immoral actions that happen by non-agents, nature, rocks falling on people, time, aging, evolutionary diseases, those kinds of things. Those are all immoral. And one of the reasons I describe it this way is if we imagine a world where we define morality purely based off of interactions with agents, and we eliminate all immorality between interactions with agents, what we're left with is a world that still has the vast majority of death and disease and destruction, tsunamis, aging, cancer, all of those still exist. Everyone still dies. Everyone still suffers tremendously. The vast majority of immoral things are still happening. It's just not by agents. And so if you compare this world to a world where we get rid of all of the involuntary positions, those by agents and those by nature, would we say both of these worlds are equally morally equivalent? Would you choose to live in these worlds 50-50? It's like, oh, they're the same. No one would say that. Clearly, morality has more depth to it than just what agents do to one another. Even if we eliminated all of that, there would still be tremendous amounts of concerns of horrible things that are happening in this world. But because of our evolutionary dispositions to label morality as things we have control over, which is usually social interactions, human dynamics, and since we don't have any control over nature, labeling those things as moral hasn't ever helped us evolutionarily to do anything, because it doesn't change anything. We have this inbuilt bias to use moral language specifically to refer to human interactions, conscious agent interactions, because we can do something about it with laws and social paradigms and norms. but we haven't gotten to the point yet where we can consider the implications of nature being immoral. We see lots of examples of people starting to see nature and refer to nature as morally relevant. I put a list of those on my website about different models of morality that establish nature as morally relevant or have moral normativity without ought statements as just descriptive values. And this is something that's becoming more common. But I think it'd be significantly more apparent once we got to the point where we eliminated all human to human interactions that are negative. People would, in my hypothesis, very clearly begin to start using that same moral language to refer to impositions by nature, rocks falling on people, gravity, aging, in place of what used to be murder and rape and those kinds of things. And I think that's going to be a natural transition. And because of this, I think that in the ultimate scheme of what morality is, we would, to have a complete model of morality, you need something that incorporates that and would be able to accurately predict how we're going to see those things in the future. So this is not a common belief that people see, that rocks falling on people is immoral, or that gravity is immoral, or evolution is immoral. But I think that's going to be the case. This is another one of the predictions I make, that if my model is correct, people as a whole are going to begin to see these things as morally relevant. And we have some evidence of this already happening throughout time. And if that's true, and my model is correct in predicting that these have moral relevance, then we need to recognize that a perfect moral world isn't one where just human interactions aren't impositions, but there are no impositions of any kind whatsoever, human or via nature. And when we do that, we have the consequence of saying, yeah, rocks falling on people are immoral, evolution is immoral, time is immoral if you don't consent to it. If you consent to it, perfectly fine, no problem. But if you don't, yes, those things are immoral, absolutely.
I guess my mind goes to how do you foresee us escaping that genetic level imposition being imposed on us, or nature being imposed against our will? Like we don't want to have this face. We don't want to, how would we ever escape that aspect, do you think? Because you have this idea of trying to eliminate these impositions of will. I have a hard time seeing how we would do that. I guess we could say maybe gene editing,
designer babies.
Yeah, designer babies.
Well, so there's two parts of that. One is that whether or not we can do it wouldn't change the model. It wouldn't be like, if it's objective morality, it would still be true whether or not we could do it. So the fact of whether we could do it is a different question. Can we do it? Yes. We can already do facial surgery. Essentially, all science is doing is fighting against nature to do exactly what we're talking about in different ways. And so given enough time, we probably will be able to completely free ourselves of the vast majority of everything, even with just the technology we know about. So like uploading ourselves to the matrix, highly possible. Doing gene editing, highly possible. CRISPR kinds of things with just a massive amount of them to change every gene in your body. Given enough technological progress, these things are absolutely possible. It's possible that we can change our consciousness to be able to switch bodies entirely, to just remove one brain. I think they've done that with a sheep. They just took a brain out and put it in a different sheep, and it survived for like a week or something. So there are lots of physically doable ways to accomplish overcoming these restrictions. Hypothetically, the end goal, if we could free ourselves from all physical limitation, hypothetically, if we had souls or something, or could create some non-physical soul, if we discovered a new ontology of magic or soul stuff, that would work too. So there's lots of logically possible ways that we could free ourselves. But the point of the morality isn't a roadmap of how to do this. It's just a description of what a perfect moral system would be, what a perfect moral world would be, whether or not we could achieve it.
And can you describe the grounding for this? And we'll finish with the grounding. I believe you ground this theory in patterns, moral intuition, and consistent moral progress. Is that correct?
Yeah, so epistemically, whatever the pieces of evidence I use to come to this conclusion would be patterns in moral intuition, moral progress, the philosophical dilemmas and distinctions, pretty much all the typical stuff used in moral philosophy. It's just all the same thing. Ontological grounding, I think it's an undiscovered law of physics. So I think it's just ontologically just something in physics, just like everything else. So yes, I'd say that if we look at the patterns of moral intuition and moral progress in every society, cross species, they are all trending in the same direction. As we increase in intelligence and resources, they have a tendency to increase the freedoms of individuals to as much as they can without causing negative consequence. And that if we follow that to the extreme of giving everyone infinite resources, which would be beyond what we physically know is possible, what would be the implications of morality? It would be no involuntary imposition would presumably be the conclusion of what a perfect world would look like.
Okay, so I've kind of ran some. I've looked at the pattern I see with regards to human beings, you know, by way ultimately of their sentiments, wanting and desiring greater amounts of flourishing for themselves by way of their physical, mental, and social health. That's the kind of pattern I see increasing over time. This would be connected with, again, with Steven Pinker's work in Enlightenment Now and the way he sources data to track human well-being around the world. So I see that strong as a strong pattern that, you know, gives that's connected to the moral intuition I have, and it also deals with that progress issue, moral progress in the direction of physical, mental, and social health. So I guess why is I know that you call your morality objective. I don't, but I think the well-being model, so long as we're talking about physical, mental, and social health, is a better empirical, data-driven tracking of moral progress than I think the involuntary imposition model is. But I anticipate you're going to say that this what you're claiming is an ontological claim. Mine isn't. Mine is more of a what I just claimed was an epistemic claim based on my subjective metrics. But,
oh no, that would be a valid objection. Your objecting is based off of, because even if I claim morality is objective and you claim it's subjective, the evidence could indicate yours and go away from mine. That would be perfectly rational. I would say it doesn't, though. I'd say like the vast majority of cases, like people wanting to self-harm or body modifications or assisted SSI, there are lots of cases where people can do things that are contrary to well-being. Playing very difficult video games to the point where you throw your computer through your TV screen because it pisses you off so much is not great for well-being. People will still choose to do it. I
don't think so, though.
I think well-being is just wrong. I don't think it doesn't matter. If people want to end or destroy their well-being, they should fully have the consent to do so. It's just irrelevant. I think consent is a great pragmatic descriptor of how we should build societies. I think it's a terrible descriptor of how we should limit individuals. Individuals should be able to just completely destroy their well-being, completely destroy their social health, completely destroy their mental health if they want, temporarily or permanently, to experience things from a different perspective.
Yeah, I agree that they should be able to do that. But I think there's something within me that wants to see them do the things they want to do in a way that serves their health and their longevity, because I see most discernible purposes served better by maintaining certain levels of physical, mental, and social health. Like, you know, if someone wants to have, and I'm not saying it's like, I know that there are people out there that want to, you know, inject heroin until they die, and that's you know, that's their you know, that's what's driving them. They have a desire drive that's built in there, and some would say, who am I to come along and say that their well-being matters? But ultimately, it just feels like trying to maximize well-being for myself and those around me. It feels like a righteous and good thing to do. I know it's not grounded in anything that I would call ontological, but it's just, what I like. For example, would you agree with the axiom that health is preferential to sickness?
Only to those who consent. So no.
Would you agree that it's almost certainly the case that, just descriptively for a moment, that almost all human beings that have ever lived would want health instead of sickness?
Almost all, maybe, but if there's even one, then the statement is false.
Yeah, like I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying it's perfect. Like that, there aren't exceptions to the rule, but I'm saying that, like, I think you, everyone else in this room, everyone who watches this video, would prefer health to sickness. That includes myself. So when I take that preference, and I look at what are the ways I can help myself in that regard and help others around me, when I know it's almost certainly the case that those around me want this for themselves, I see virtue in calling this my moral quest because it is such a universal desire. I'm not saying I would want to violate anyone's consent. Like, I value consent very highly. I wouldn't want to violate anyone's consent by way of well-being in almost all cases. Now, when we're talking about cases of where people are of sound mind and they need or people are of unsound mind and they need a medication administered to them, and they're essentially mentally handicapped, I think it's the good and righteous thing to do to give them their necessary medication. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So for kids or people with mental handicaps, they cannot consent, and consent is the required criteria here. The main disagreement I think I have with you is that I don't think well-being matters at all. I don't care. It's irrelevant. I think consent matters. And if people consent to well-being, then well-being matters. And most people do, 100%. That's clearly the vast majority of people want well-being. But if some people don't and they want to violate their well-being, physical, mental, or social, that should 100% be the priority. So if we're looking at standards of which is the priority in describing what a moral sentiment should be, the consent one wins 100% of the time. It describes all of the cases. So if you said that there's some minority of people, some exceptions to the rule, who would prefer sickness over health, which there probably are. Like, I imagine what we call sickness, other people would call healthy in lots of different cases where they would prefer to lose their arm, prefer to be short, prefer to be
facts. Yeah, I'm talking about facts with regards to physical, mental, and social health, not just someone's opinion of what sickness is or what or what health means. I'm talking about what medical science.
Well, so like people used to inject themselves with tapeworms to lose weight. So they used to ingest themselves with tapeworms because that's what they thought was healthy. That's what they wanted. That's what we would call sickness. Yep. That's subjective. They can pick that one way or the other. Scientifically, clearly not healthy, clearly sickness. But if they consent to that, that's what they want, that takes priority 100% of the time. So they say, I want sickness over health. By every scientific definition, they are correct. They get to make that decision.
I guess the hard case for this is if we were in a global pandemic, and this is where you and I would probably, again, part ways. If we were in a global pandemic that was, let's say, 1,000,000 times deadlier, or no, let's say 1,000 times deadlier than COVID.
Maybe if it was 10 times deadlier, we'd all be dead pretty much. So that would be bad.
Yeah. But there was a full-on cure for this disease, but the anti-vaxxers just chose to want to spread it around and didn't want to be vaccinated for it. I would see it as a bad thing, but a righteous thing to force them to be vaccinated. Would you see that as a justified?
Well, you said it's a bad thing. Why is it a bad thing if it's improving everyone's well-being, social, physical and mental health. It would be
Yeah.
diminishing their mental health, but that would be the
Yeah,
only
because
downside. Why is it
because
a
I don't
bad thing?
engage in, yeah, I don't engage in simple consequentialism, but like I think it is bad to violate their consent.
Right.
I
So it's
think it
not
is bad.
just about well-being. There's something else there. The consent thing matters. And
Well, no, consent is part of well-being. Consent is part of physical, mental, and social health. I would never remove consent from that trifecta.
all right,
Never.
but the question is which takes priority? If one can override all of the others, that's the
Yeah.
one that matters.
The
And
maximizing well-being for myself and those around me takes maximal priority. So if
but then why is it
if
bad to force them? Because if you're maximizing well-being for
because
yourself and those around
yeah,
you, then and that takes priority, then it shouldn't be bad to force someone else to take vaccines, right? That would because the when we're looking at priority, we're saying what determines something is moral versus immoral. And if you're saying
I'm looking at the act itself, that violating someone's consent, I agree, is a bad act. But sometimes I think, and this is why I think in moral discussions, I think the high resolution thing to do is delineate between good, bad, right, and wrong. I know not all philosophers agree with me on that, but there are a lot who do. But this allows me to deal with things like war, where I think it's bad. Everything to do with war is almost always bad. But there are times where war is made righteous, so long as it's in preservation of people's ability to maximize well-being for themselves and those around them. So and I'm not discounting consent at all. I think consent is very important, and I think it is the consent issue that would make me consider the forced vaccination in we're talking like dire circumstances, right, everyone? I'm not talking about COVID. I'm talking about things that are so bad that the mere existence of this bad idea in the mind of the anti-vaxxers is going to cause millions upon millions of deaths, maybe even end the entire human race. So what I'm saying is that violating the consent in this situation would be made fully righteous by way of preserving physical, mental, and social health for humanity. But we also must consider the agent themselves that are being imposed on and having their consent violated. And I think for that reason, it would be a bad act. I wouldn't see it as a good act, even if we saved every human being's life on the planet by violating one person's consent to enforce this vaccination. I would still think it's a bad act, but fully righteous. So it's not that I don't consider consent. Like, I feel strongly about consent like you do, TJump, but it's not the ultimate arbiter for me. So I think that's where we disagree. But I mean, I've really enjoyed this conversation with you, and I think we should have many more like this in the future. Maybe we'll do one on the Pangburn stage in front of a live audience, and we can talk about some things. Do you have any final thoughts before we move to the group conversation here?
Yeah. So it's really interesting to me because the way you say that, if the final ultimate arbiter is well-being, but it can still be bad, that seems like a contradiction in a way, because you're saying the 100% determining factor is X, but there's still some bad thing over here going on. So it seems like you've bifurcated morality into two different subsets. You said like good and bad, right and wrong, and there's separate criteria, and we're using.
And I think it's I mean, I think it's actually necessary in philosophy, because then we start saying things are like, it's immoral to do that, but it's justified. Like, I think you use that language. You say it's immoral to do that thing, but I see it as justified. It's the same thing I'm doing. I'm saying that this is a bad thing, but it's justified, or I use righteous on this side. But I think we just use different language, and we're doing kind of the same thing.
Well, sort of, but I see a slight contradiction in yours, because you seem to be using two different criteria, which makes it harder to really evaluate like what is the ultimate end all be all of morality. Whereas mine, it's like, this is moral and immoral, 100%. There's no changes, and it's just minimizing as much as maximizing based off of your limitations.
Yep.
But the reason I think that's important is in the discussion of morality, where was I going with this? It was
Oh, you were
the
talking about the different language being used, um, and then in discussions about morality, perhaps dealing with the kinds of language we use. Or
yeah. So from my perspective, it seems like there's a contradiction in because you're using two different criteria where you're saying this is the ultimate criteria, but you have separated into two different things: the righteousness and wrongness, and the moral, the good and bad, or something like that. And that seems um, like I would need to understand that more to see if that to try to build that into a model that I could understand as well. But yeah, I think we need an ultimate. This is what defines morality. It's a single principle, and mine can do that. And it
yeah,
doesn't.
I don't think we, yeah, I don't think we do, and I understand why yours does that, because I think it is like a single hammer answer, the moral realist answer, and I think mine just I don't believe mine exists. I don't believe anyone's exists really at that level to like bridge that human Izok gap, but I don't find your conclusions less virtuous for that reason. I think there are so many good things about dealing with the violation of consent. I I I would be interested to see if like the world of academic philosophy moves in the direction of viewing things like gravity as evil or bad. I don't predict that. I don't see that happening. I see why you're doing that because it's coherent and rational to your model. It makes perfect sense that you would do that because you kind of have to deal with the you know that forced imposition of will coming by way of gravity and other things. But yeah, I think maybe the next time we have a discussion, we can talk about specifically the delineation between good, bad, right, wrong. If you'd be interested in that, because I can share some stuff with you that I'm writing in my book, and yeah, and we can maybe talk about my virtues and maxims next time, and can pick
Sure.
your brain about more stuff. But
Well,
yeah,
really where I was
really,
going.
yeah,
It was, I think
yeah,
that
yeah,
if we achieved a world of perfect well-being, and there was a tool we could use to damage well-being via consent, I think that tool, if we were simply prioritizing well-being, we would never create that tool. Whereas if we were prioritizing consent, we would absolutely create that tool. And I think the vast majority of people we see today actually do. It's called video games. You're causing yourself pain and stress unnecessarily, especially the Dark Souls and very hard games. We choose to damage our well-being because it's fun. Um, and I think that we
yeah.
should
It feels
always,
good.
I
Yeah.
think it feels good at the end when you win. It feels very bad in all the times you're
But
losing.
that's also part of well-being, right? Like I play very difficult games sometimes, and chess makes me pull my hairs out when I'm playing like
Oh yeah, what's your
you
rating?
know 1800 rating
Nice.
people. That makes me want to destroy myself when I'm playing people like that. I'm not there. I used to be around 1500, um
It's one of my other
but
jobs. Actually, I'm a
yeah.
chess coach.
What's that?
It's one of my other jobs. I'm a chess coach. I'm
Oh, really?
2150 on
Well,
chess.com.
oh wow! Like, well, I could use a lot of coaching, so maybe I'll have to hire you for that. Um, but yeah, I mean, all of that stuff. Consent is a huge part of physical, mental, and social health. Medical science will tell us this all through medical ethics, like where I look to get my facts about well-being, at least well-being in the way I conceive of it. So, like, yeah, man, I'm not. I'm not playing fast and loose with the importance of consent with regards to well-being, and in that idea you just had about like, well, if we had maximal physical, mental, and social health, and someone came along and said, no, we thought this was maximum, but we can have even higher if we hammer away consent, right? I don't think that. Well, it's kind of like in a world where that would actually improve the well-being and that the violation of consent wouldn't harm the physical, mental, and social health, in a strange world where that would wouldn't cause a negative detriment to that, then I could see human beings being fine with that, like taking the hammer to consent to further maximize their well-being. But I think with how human beings operate now, any kind of hammer that would come across to their consent would cause severe detriment to their physical, mental, and social health. So I think your system and my system are kind of necessarily linked, even though we have different foundational conclusions. But I think for the most part, when it comes to applied ethics, it seems like a lot of the things, even though we frame them differently, we use different language, I think we would come to many of the same conclusions practically.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, thank you, TJump. Okay, everyone, we're going to jump down really quick to the live hangout tab. You'll see it. It's got a big red ball on it. Get down there. We're going to do rapid fire because Lauren Southern's joining us in 30 minutes. So we're going to do some rapid fire Q&A back and forth with Mr. Tom Jump. All right. Who wants to go first? Perry, let's go to Perry first. Perry, you're up first for your questions for Mr. Jump here.
I don't actually have a question, but Robin does, and her mic isn't working, so I'm speaking on behalf of her. You hear TJump? I can't see if he's in here yet or not.
1 sec. Let me just double check it. I think he just sent me a DM. Let me just double check. Oh, I don't have permission to speak, he says. Of course, we got to give him the roles
or something.
Got to give him the roles. So then we do the there and there. Okay, there. You should be good now, Tom.
All right, yeah.
Sweet.
Would have been a very short Q&A.
That would have been super short. Okay, go ahead.
So yeah. TJump, on behalf of Robin Webster, her mic isn't working. She wants to ask you, what is the reason you think it is unlikely that evolution cannot account for moral progress?
I never said it was unlikely. It can absolutely account for moral progress. I'm saying that I make predictions that of things that it couldn't account for. So like if other beings in other parts of the universe that didn't evolve, or AIs that didn't evolve, also came to the conclusions of morality, that would prove that morality was more diverse than evolution. That would prove that it doesn't just come from evolution if there are examples of the same moral progress in things that didn't evolve. So I never said it was unlikely. It absolutely can explain it. The best scientific explanation of morality is purely evolutionary right now. But if we discover that the same moral patterns exist in non-evolutionary beings, that would rule out evolution as the explanation.
Like aliens or something?
Yes, as long as they didn't evolve, yes. AI would be the more presumable example.
All right, cool.
Thanks, Perry. Let's move to Don next. Don, go ahead.
What up? I guess my only less of a question and more just of a something I've noticed in your conversation with Travis. I noticed that Travis was giving you like a multitude of things that he tries to ground ethics and morals in, and you seem to have the knee-jerk reaction to try to ground things in a singular thing. Do you think that just like Descartes and many other like modern rationalist philosophers, you are trying to find like an Archimedean lever from which you could like create all reasons for a specific thing? Or that was the Cartesian project. And if so, don't you think it is wise to abandon it in the same way that the American pragmatists did, or even the postmodernists did?
No, I think that any good system is defined primarily by simplicity, especially in the context of applications in AI. So if you have multiple levers, it has more probability of getting to incorrect conclusions or vague conclusions. And so the reason we prioritize simplicity in philosophy and science and physics is because it just gets us to better and more consistent answers. The more levers you have, the worse the system typically.
I actually disagree. I think that the more the possible levers and permutations and lenses, the more resilient the system can be and is able to detect its own falsehoods.
Then why do you think in physics we only prioritize the simplest and the least levers?
Well, even in physics, specific phenomena tries to be reduced to a singular thing, but as we go to quantum mechanics, it becomes probabilistic. We realize we can't always reduce things to a single thing.
Well, it's always a single equation. So what do you mean? Like which there's a single equation that we use.
Well, that's really in physics is kind of a hard. So you're trying to treat morality as a hard science in a way. and saying we can just reduce it to one thing.
Yes, that's like all sciences. We
That's
try
it.
to make
That's
them all
awesome.
hard sciences. Yeah.
I think that even in hard science you get to the problem of reductionism where at some point you reduce it to what at the bottom is it turtles all the way down? Is it going to be a specific platonic object? Like what would it be?
Well, in science, we always prioritize the simplest possible explanation. Physics, math, everything is just
but
the
they do
simplest.
change over time. No, they can change.
To simpler
can
ones,
realize
yes. We try to make it to always simpler ones and simpler as fast as we can.
And what if you can't make it simpler because then it creates more errors?
Then you have the simplest version.
But can't you also recognize that sometimes reducing it to one, whether it be an ontological object like consent, that could be the error to begin with because that's not the most basic one. There's a multitude of them that are equal, like wherever it might be.
There are different possibilities that if they all get the exact same answers, that's usually typically not the case. Like, for example, I disagree that well-being is the case because I think that consent overrides well-being 100% of the time. So I would say that in this case, the simplest answer is a single principle. And I think pretty much most models of morality do that. Most models of morality have a single principle that defines what they use. That's pretty standard.
But don't you think that depends on like the particulars of what's happening in the case by case basis? Like let's say like your child can't. Let's say someone who's a baby who's the age of 2 or age of 1 completely lacks any ability to consent. Right? They just don't even have the ability. There's no question of consent. So it defaults on their parents or whatever it might be. Would you say it's okay for their parents to put them in front of a bomb to martyr them for whatever God they believe in? Like you would agree that there it doesn't matter what their consent is.
So if they don't have consent, then you can't use consent. You have to use something else. So in that case, I'd be like, absolutely, you use well-being because there's no consent there.
But you see, so where consent is missing, you put well-being instead. So consent isn't at the bottom of it. There's something else involved.
Well, no. So if we added consent,
then
consent would be the determining factor. So consent is always the determining factor. And if there's no consent there, like in physics, if there's no gravity, well, then a different force would take over. That doesn't mean gravity isn't the superlative force that governs everything. It still is. But if it's not there, then what's the next thing that's less important that we would look at? Yeah, we can do that for sure. Like it wouldn't be like, after we get rid of this, there's no other considerations.
Yeah, I just have a huge problem with putting consent first. Like I see like heroin addicts in the street, like whether they want to or not, I don't think it's relevant. I think we should do everything about to help them gain back their own internal sovereignty and their ability to make better choices from themselves, even if they consent to living a life of privation. Like,
well, you just said they don't consent because they don't have.
No, I said even if they do consent.
Control. So
even if they do consent,
if there's a fully intellectual individual who can consent and wants to just do cocaine in the
live in a life of privation, covered in shit, and they want to be in depression, they want to be in anxietyville, I think that it's on us to actually stop that.
I think that you're immoral. I think that you're.
I think you're immoral.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you're immoral for not imposing on them. I think you're actually evil, honestly. But
the problem is morality is like you're proposing would literally destroy everyone over. It would just turn us all into cyborgs. Like that's the exact example I was using with Travis earlier. If you can bash away consent and impose well-being, we would all become the Borg, and the AI would take us all over because we would all be perfectly healthy, and we'd only be able to think happy thoughts, and it would control us all, and there would be freedom.
I think it's too black and white. I think it's too black and white thinking.
But
that's
and one thing to add, just remember, I did say that I think even from a moral well-being perspective, I don't think human beings that value consent so highly would find that to be in their best interests with regards to consent. But okay, Don, thank you. Simos, you're unmuted. You got something, Simos? Mr. Simos, bring me a dream. Ba, 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 ba. Okay,
there
anyone?
Go. Okay.
There we go. Yeah.
I muted myself.
I know it's your first day on Discord, so.
Oh, I'm so nervous. Yeah, no, look, I spoke to Tom. You obviously, this is a long time ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, something like that. And we talked about your moral theory, and I really enjoyed the conversation. And I learned a lot. I went away, looked a load up on SEP and what have you, So, that's a wonderful thing and everything. And I'd just like to ask you now something I started asking you about then, but I didn't have much philosophical kind of reflection or knowledge to be able to really discuss it with you properly. And so I'm actually, now you've moved on as well as I have, I hope, that this will be, this won't be too much of a diversion for you, which is to ask you about, um, you're presumably you still claim, or you're still saying that your objective moral system doesn't contain oughts in itself.
Yep, there's no normativity. So like that's a pretty standard thing. I actually have a
Right,
list
okay.
of all models of morality that already do this. So it's not unique to mine. It's a very
No, agree. I went away, looked at SEP and found several examples by some very prominent philosophers, J.L. Mackie being one of them, I believe. But anyway, so what I would like to ask you is, because we're not in the best possible world, right? We're going to have to make some kind of whatever what should I say, some kind of deal with each other, some kind of social contract to decide that where our will crosses with other people, that we have some plan at least in place, whether it be non-normative or normative. I would assume you'd say that's the normative part that comes later in this, taking some of the pragmatic consequences, I should say, to your own view, a worldview or philosophy on morals. How
yeah.
would you respond to that?
Yeah, so I think you can absolutely have normativity in like social dynamics and social hierarchies. You should not punch the baby, but normativity isn't required for objective morality, like in the context of what a moral system actually is. But yeah, you can absolutely apply normativity and oughts as a secondary social layer in order to try to make society a better place. 100%. So I definitely don't have a problem with normativity as a social construct or a laws hierarchy. It's just not required in the objective model itself.
Okay, so I now want to ask you, how do you get from your objective, non-normative moral system? How do you apply that then in this social construct, which is going to give you the normative conclusion on action in the real world?
Give it to AI. So if my morality is correct and we do what Travis said earlier and give it to all the experts to evaluate and build it into a coherent model and give it to AI, it would do it. So the model isn't specifically for people to ingest and then use it as a method to determine actions in their life. It's for AI to be able to not do immoral things to people.
Right. Okay, but that's how would the reasoning go?
The reasoning?
Yeah, like, so how would you go from your objective moral, non-normative moral system to saying somebody ought to not punch the baby? Take me through that process so I can understand a logical argument why I shouldn't kill the baby.
Well, whether you should or shouldn't is irrelevant. It just says it's immoral to kill the baby. Whether you should or shouldn't is that's the normativity part that we just don't need. I can do an evaluative claim.
Sorry, Tom. I hate to interrupt you. What I'm actually asking you is, given your moral system, right? Then what's the next step to actually using your moral system in some kind of pragmatic way in our interactions between each other?
Don't force people to do things they don't consent to. That's it.
Sorry, could you say that again? So allow people to do non-consensual things.
Don't allow people to do non-consensual things, I think. I don't know.
Oh,
it'd be more like,
sorry.
Don't force people to do things they don't consent to.
Right. And what is the outcome of those things? Like, so if they do, what happens to them?
There is no consequence there. It's a truth claim. It says it's immoral to do this. There's no the consequences would be imposed by society. That would be a society question, not a moral question.
That's a society question. Okay. So then the question becomes, what normative argument have you got that society should do these things, right?
There's no normativity there. You don't need an argument. It's just truth. If you value truth,
right.
here's
a normative
question. If you value truth, do the true things.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what it comes down to then, isn't it? You're saying, look, if these things are consistent with reality, right, in some, idealistic way at such a very high probability that it's as close to 1 as you want to get, then you know, then society is going to have to punish you for breaking somebody else's consent.
Sure, that's called a hypothetical imperative as opposed to a categorical imperative. So normativity is the categorical side normally. Hypothetical is if you value X, you should do Y. And that doesn't require normativity.
Right. So that difference between should and ought, then
those are the synonyms. Okay. Should and ought are synonyms.
They are synonyms. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that sounds to me like if you're saying should, that's a normative word then.
No, it's a hypothetical. System. If you want X, you should do Y. Is a hypothetical imperative.
I see.
A normativity in the way that you're using it is categorical imperative, saying there is some ought in the universe, some oughtness or shouldness that exists objectively in a moral system. That part you don't need. You can say It is true that X is immoral, and then you can use only the hypothetical imperative and say if you value morality, you ought not do X. So you can have the oughts as hypothetical imperatives without any normativity, because normativity is the categorical part. You don't need the categorical part.
Right. So because you're not saying if you want X, you should. See, you're saying if you want X again there, which every time I say if you want, that's also a part of a normative verb, or almost a prefix to the word or the phrase, which is going to give you or allow you to take some oughts from it.
Right.
So
that's the hypothetical part. So the hypothetical imperative always starts with the if you want, then do. The categorical is just do. It's just you ought do. There's no then you if you want.
You ought do.
Yeah. So the categorical imperatives don't have the if you want part. Hypothetical imperatives have the if you want part. So in a moral system,
categorical ones are you ought do.
Yeah. There's no like if you want. It's just the you ought do because it's intrinsic to the morality.
Right. So isn't that on what's that grounded on, the ought there?
I don't have that in mind. So that would be like a different model of morality. My moralities have the if you want part.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I'm trying to speak in the hypothetical, not the hypothetical, the pragmatic way of when we're now actually in society dealing with these questions. You just don't think there's ever a time when you think, well, actually we ought to do X, Y, Z, meaning some kind of normative or categorical imperative.
I'm not sure what your question is. So there are lots of times when we can say you ought not punch babies, like because it imposes on their will. Like you can say that for lots of things. Anything that we think is an imposition of will, you can say you ought not do it. But that's hypothetical. It's a societal way of describing the model of morality. It isn't intrinsic to the model of morality.
Yeah, I think I asked if it's possible to take one of these actions, right, which are categorical, right, and say, is it always the case that you can rephrase them with
yes, it's always the case. It's always the case. You can take any categorical imperative and make it hypothetical.
Or can you do it vice versa and take any hypothetical imperative and make it categorical?
Yes, you just get rid of the if you want part.
Yeah. So again, maybe we had this before, but isn't that just a semantic difference?
Sure, it's a semantic difference between categorical and hypothetical imperatives, but it has no reference on whether my model itself has normativity or whether normativity is required.
I'm not talking about your model, Tom. I was talking about the pragmatic side of trying to apply it to a society which isn't the best possible world.
So I don't really understand your question.
I'm granting the best possible world morality system, whole scale. And I'm saying, okay, well, now if we pragmatically apply that to the world we're actually in rather than the best possible world, right, then we need to make some,
You're asking for like laws that we should do, like legalize marijuana, like no drug, no crimes that have no harm.
Yeah, no, I could almost be with you if I was 20 years younger. But since then,
hey, don't enforce an age limit on marijuana, okay? I don't want age limits on marijuana.
Just want to say to any kids that come across this, I lost my lungs to marijuana.
Okay.
Anyway, and that was a categorical imperative. That's how much I enjoyed it. But nonetheless, I guess that would fit in with Tom's model, just to finish on, right? Of saying, well, look, I've paid this huge price, but I'm not saying that I'd regret the actions that I've willed to do
Oh
in the
God,
period of
man.
time.
Oh,
Just to
oh,
say.
oh God,
Okay.
you show them so nice.
Thank you so much,
Oh, they're
guys.
so big. And,
Yeah, I was hearing
I love the
someone's
shape,
unmuted
man.
mic did not sound like there was PG
Uh,
13
I'm
behavior
I think it's
happening.
still
you
It
guys are
going
looks
on
so
for me.
happy.
Aaron bin Avin Labe.
Yeah, it's still going
Oh,
on
yeah.
for me.
Okay, server mute. There we go.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyway,
Who
thanks, Tom.
has? Yeah. Thanks a lot, Simos. And you forgot to drop Balchinian philosophy on
Oh, God, I said I was
on
going to do
TJump.
it. Ah,
Okay.
damn it.
That's
I
all
can't
right.
now.
You
I've
missed
seen
the
his
opportunity.
beard. I'm not sure I can take the itch.
Yeah.
You know, you got to
exactly.
be ready with your balls
M-
to the right chin. You know,
Uh,
one man's chin is another man's balls. I always say that.
right. Murdy man, did you have a question for
Yeah, I have
Mr.
like
Jump?
two, but I guess the first one would be like TJump, if we would just force everybody to be brains and vats, and there'd be like pumped full of stimuli, regardless of like if they wanted to be in there, that would still be a preferable world to what we live in now. In your moral view, right?
No, my moral view is consent. So if they didn't consent to that, that would be horribly immoral.
But they didn't consent to being here either. So the question is like, they're pumped full of stimuli, and they could kind of choose whatever they want in that brain vat world, as opposed to here. But neither here or there were we chosen to be in.
Again, I already answered that. If they were forced to be there, it's still immoral. So if they're forced to be here, then you force them to be somewhere else. That's just two immoral things. You haven't made it better.
Well, no, but then you have all the other immoral things of this universe as well.
Sure.
So it's both impositions of will being forced to be there, and like as opposed to the brain aid one where it's just the stimuli that you put in, rather than in this world where it's all the other ones. That would be a preferable world.
So like hypothetically, if before we were born into this world, you could like, there's two possible worlds, one with this one, which we are physical beings in the world, and one where we're brains and vats. And
or your parents could decide like, oh, you can participate in this world or brain and vat.
Sure. Yeah, sure. If we were trying to pick which one is better, probably brain and vet is probably better, I would guess. But that'd be a subjective decision. It would be up to the individual. It's not like an objective answer there.
Okay. Yeah. But as long as we're getting closer to them being able to make more choices with less imposition of will, that is a better world.
If the individual chooses it, it's not that lack of imposition is good. It's involuntary imposition. So if you choose to impose impositions on yourself, that's perfectly moral. It's not just minimizing impositions, it's minimizing involuntary impositions.
Okay. And then the next question is like, for something to be an
Make
involuntary
it a very quick
imposition
one.
of,
Thank you.
yeah, if something's an involuntary imposition against your will, you have to be educated in knowing the consequences for it to actually be an imposition against your will. No?
Depends on what you mean. So not necessarily. Like it could be an imposition on your will whether or not you know the consequences of it. You can still not like it. Like a kid getting a shot, it'd still be an imposition of his will.
Yeah, I would say more for the detrimental side. Like doing heroin, you could still do heroin, but like you can't consciously choose heroin when you're on heroin.
Right. So you have to be able to consent to be able to consent. Yes. If you don't have the mental
but
ability
part
to
of consent is education in the is at least in the outcomes of it, because otherwise, like, how do you properly consent to something that you don't know what the outcomes are?
Sort of yes, sort of no. So like the outcomes themselves would also be things you have to consent to in the best of all possible worlds. So you couldn't consent to an action, and then any unknown consents automatically happen to you without consent. That would, in the best of all possible worlds, that wouldn't be an option. You would have to consent to each individual consequence.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thanks everyone, but special thanks to TJump. Tom, thanks for coming on today. I really appreciate that. Are you working on another book right now, or anything you want to announce?
Sort of, yes. I'm working on my epistemology one, but not in a hurry. So I'm just working right now, just hanging out, relationship stuff.
Okay, cool. Well, great. Thanks, Tom, and I look forward to having you back again, where we can sit down for another conversation, and hopefully we can get New York locked in so we can get you on the Pangburn stage for your debut.
Absolutely. So, thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yeah, have a good one.
Bye.